Never missed a class. This went on for 6 months, and I would go every maybe second or third week, and I was always back in class Tuesday morning. Now, it is, I suppose, to go on, only fitting, given my persona, for me to make a last substantive point that some people might consider controversial. Controversial or not, the following is something I believe and to which I am cause committed. A possible solution to or settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is the heart of the Arab-Israeli conflict, is constantly discussed by the involved parties and by interested observers and commentators. Almost everyone who engages in this discussion is in favor of peace and resolution. The problem is that different people, organizations, and governments differ greatly in their definitions of what should and could be a peaceful resolution. For a while, the so-called two-state solution has been the most heralded approach. But alas, Palestinians and the Israeli government have diametrically opposite definitions of what should constitute a Palestinian state. Palestinians who argue for a Palestinian state alongside the Jewish Zionist state of Israel say that the state should encompass all of Gaza, perhaps, and all of Gaza, not just perhaps, and the West Bank, occupied by Israel since June 1967, and Palestinians say the state should be sovereign. Successive Israeli governments have stated that Palestinians maybe could have what the Israeli government calls autonomous rule in Gaza and only in those parts of the West Bank that Israel chooses for the autonomous rule state to exist. Autonomous rule means Palestinians can have a type of local government and police force, and they can control their schools, etc. But under the concept of autonomous rule, the state of Israel, more powerful by far than the entire Arab Middle East, can go into those areas at any time that it decides it does not like what Palestinians are doing. That is, any time that from the Israeli government's point of view, there is a threat to Israel as determined by the Israeli government. No Israeli government to date has allowed a Palestinian sovereign state discussion to be put on the table for negotiation. The United States has to date backed the Israeli definition completely, despite a few uttered comments here and there by United States officials that might, if stretched unduly, lead to a questioning of some of the Israeli positions. So the Palestinian-Israeli definitions of state are at odds with one another. Factually, in terms of the realistic situation, the two-state option has been really eliminated as a practical solution. Jewish settlements have divided the Palestinian territory in the West Bank so that Palestinians live in former South African types of Bantustans. The Jewish settlers today have in control at least 43% of all the land in the West Bank. Without let-up, Jewish settlements have been expanded consistently in the West Bank since 1967. There were 109,000 Jewish settlers in 1993 in the West Bank at the time of the ill-fated Oslo Agreement. Now there are over 350,000 Jewish settlers. The current Netanyahu government, according to a documented report in the newspaper Haaretz, Israeli newspaper, 2 weeks ago, the present government is starting to build 3,000 more houses in settlements. Again, the United States government has not formally objected to this, and both directly and indirectly supplies funding for this expansion. And the Israeli government is also completing the building of a wall in the West Bank that separates Palestinians from Jews and actually adds substantively to Israeli confiscation of even more West Bank Palestinian land. The settlements alone have not only blocked, but by now have made a two-state solution virtually impossible to achieve. In addition, in order to ensure the separation of West Bank Arabs and Jews, Israel has erected more than 625 checkpoints, roadblocks, and other barriers. There has been a 70% increase since 2005 in a total area, the total size of Delaware, the second smallest state. The Jewish settlers don't have to contend with those roadblocks. Palestinians do, and well, if time permitted, I could specify enormous problems that Palestinians have from that. The Israeli government, moreover, has made in the period since 1967 massive changes on the ground that have taken land away from and hurt Palestinians in many ways. And then, many of the Jewish settlers are ultra-Orthodox, Messianic, fundamentalist religious Zionists. They fervently believe that the entire West Bank is part of the land promised by Jews, promised to the Jews by God. They believe that it would be a sin to relinquish any of this promised land to non-Jews, and they are ready and willing to fight anyone, even including Israeli soldiers, who might try to evict them. It is sheer folly to believe that any Israeli government in the near future, especially the new incoming rightist government, headed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, will even consider uprooting these settlers in order to have a Palestinian state established in the West Bank. Israeli President Shimon Peres warned in London recently that any attempt by the Israeli government to evict settlers could trigger a civil war among Israeli Jews. That will not happen. And aside from the practical realities, from a humanitarian and democratic perspective, one democratic secular state in Palestine, Israel, that would and could by law and in public policy guarantee equal rights to all citizens is, I contend, the best solution to the conflict, even if it takes a good deal of time to be instituted. There are a variety of possible federation and confederation structures that could be established and have been established elsewhere to protect religious, ethnic, cultural, and in some ways even nationalistic groups. Admittedly, some people argue that a one-state solution would not only mean the end of the Zionist Jewish state, but would put Jews in jeopardy, especially since Palestinians have such a high birth rate and would, if they already have not, become the majority in all of Israel, which includes the occupied territories. Again, there are many ways to protect minorities. Jews, most of the time anyway, certainly not all the time, but most of the time, Jews fared well in Arab states in the Middle East before the onslaught of Zionism and the creation of the exclusive state of Israel, which by law has granted and does grant rights and privileges to Jews not granted to non-Jews, even those non-Jews who are Israeli citizens. I suggest that we should try to replace exclusive states, be they Muslim, Jewish, black, white, or something else, with states that are more democratic. A one-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict may be a bit long in coming, but we should nevertheless favor it. It was Albert Einstein who believed in what he called sympathetic cooperation between the two great Semitic peoples, and who insisted, I'm quoting him, that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. A few more Israeli Jews and Palestinians are beginning to think now, as some thought previously, about what this theory, posited by Einstein, would mean if practiced. These people and others might be encouraged a bit by recalling the advocacy of the great Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who argued for a binational state of joint sovereignty with complete equality of rights between the two partners. Such a state in historic Palestine would be predicated upon, as Buber put it, the love of their homeland that these two people share. I suppose that we can say this last point is my cause-committed political advocacy for today, and I certainly do not apologize if some people consider it controversial. I want to finish this lecture by citing in a couple sentences only two most important considerations that I had before coming to this university, but which nevertheless have become even more embedded by what I have thought about and tried to do in the past 42 years. Two